Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to introduce Donald to everyone. So the first time when I heard about Donald's story, I was so impressed how he overcame his addiction and depression. So I'm just going to give the mic to Donald, and he's going to have a session. Hopefully, gonna inspire you guys and empower you guys. Thank you, Donald.
Oh, thank you, Angela. Hi, my name is Don, and I always say, I guess I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step programs because we usually introduce ourselves by saying, hello, my name is Don, and I'm an alcoholic. That's part of my story. The reason that we always speak and make that declaration is for us to take ownership of our what we call our disease. And I know that if you're not familiar with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, people sometimes say, well, how can alcoholism or addiction be a disease? It's it's not the same as a disease like cancer, obviously, but when I was drinking, I didn't understand that either until I started rehabbing myself. And it is a disease because it's a disease of the mind, and it's a disease of the body, and it's a disease of the spirit. That's what I've learned in my recovery. My last drink was April 30th, 1995. So I'm going to be 48 years old this year. Yeah, 48 years old this year, 47 this year. So I haven't had a drink since just before I turned 21. I think what I'm going to go through is basically talk about how it started. I was just born outside Toronto. I'm the youngest of 7 children, and obviously I'm the a child of immigrant parents who came from southern China. The reason I give that background is not because that causes addiction, is because whatever our influences us or how we grow up, what they call is how we are domesticated. It influences the way we are, influences the way our thoughts are, it influences how we think, and influences our values. My parents were married under a prearranged marriage, not because they fell in love, because it was not by choice. And my father came over, obviously for to give the family and the children a better life. But I would say I was brought up with very little understanding of love and affection. It was very much a survival mentality. My parents were poor immigrant farmers. And, it's like they say, my dad probably came over $5 in his pocket and tried to make it work. And we were always brought up poor. And like I said, there wasn't a lot of affection. My father was a short order cook for most of his life. That doesn't pay a lot. And when you try to raise, say, I would say 6 kids, because I'm going to explain that later. I'm the youngest of 7, but when you try to raise 6 kids, that's very hard. And because we didn't have a lot of things that were said when I was growing up is, we don't have enough and you're not good enough. So you got to make sure that you survive in this world. That influences how I think. It influences how I see the world. It means I'm not good enough. That's how it starts. My parents also didn't get along much because there wasn't a lot of money to go around and they were always fighting. So when I was growing up, it came to the point where my mom became very fearful the kids would not have enough to eat. So she started shoplifting. And she shoplifted a lot, she stole a lot, and it got to the point where she started getting caught. And she got caught and she had to go to jail. And that's how I was brought up. So I had this value system. You got to make sure that you take what you can get because it's really hard to come by. And I had this value system. You break the law if you need to. I'm not blaming my mom. Today, I don't blame my mom, but I do say that influenced me because when you're brought up under fear, and that's really what it is, it's not because I understand that it's fear. That's why I say that that was something that was really hard for me because when I had a lot of difficult times. I had a hard time understanding my mom when I was a child of 10 years old and she's in jail. I felt that she ruined our family. Um, she was mean to my dad, and she put us through a lot of hurt and pain as children. So by the time I was 14, I didn't feel I belonged anywhere. I didn't feel I belong in society. I didn't feel I belong in school. I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't feel loved at home, and the depression set in. Um, I can't identify at 12 years old what depression is, at 10 years old, at 15 years old. You just feel that that's been your whole reality, that you're not good enough, you don't belong anywhere. And at 8 years old, um, I remember sometimes going to bed not wanting to wake up, but I didn't understand that as depression. Um, I think today, if times were different back then, because there's probably signs of that when I was in school, that it'd be hard for me to concentrate. I'll be very sad, and I didn't have a lot of friends. And today, teachers are taught to see things like that, but back then they didn't really. Uh, they weren't trained. It wasn't talked about depression in kids. Um, at 14 years old, I do what sometimes high school kids do. I started experimenting with beer. When I had my first beer, um, I didn't like the taste of it, but it made me feel different. It made me feel different because beer makes you think differently about yourself, and it takes what I call the pain of hurt away. Um, I started I started losing interest in school by the time I was 15. That beer really affected my life because it gave me an escape as to how I felt about myself. I didn't understand how I felt about myself was different from everybody else, having joy in their life. I didn't know that I had a joyless life. By the time I was 16, um, I really started losing interest in school, and people wonder, they go, what, 15, 14, 15, 16, how do you find alcohol? And how do you find drugs? When you need to make it happen, it will happen, just like the way my mom taught me that if you need to steal to make it happen, you will do it. So I started hanging around a lot of street kids and street, adults who did things on the street like selling drugs and burglary and armed robbery and things like that. That was my normal. I wasn't in school anymore. By the time I was 16, I was able to find a lot of alcohol around me, and I was drinking pretty much every day. Um, I tried to stay in school, but I knew I had a problem when I couldn't leave the house without having 2 to 3 shots of whiskey every morning. And I took a bottle with me, a 7-Up bottle that was filled with whiskey to school, to high school, because it was a green bottle. You couldn't tell what was in there. I used to come home about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, put on the alarm, try to get up the next day, 7:30, 8 o'clock to go to school. I did this for about a month, and then a month led to 2 months to 3 months, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I ended up dropping out of high school by the time I was 16. By the time I was 17, all my sisters and my brother had moved out. I was always pretty much by myself because there was a big age gap in the family. My oldest brother is 23 years older than me, so I was the only person left at home. My mother was in jail quite a bit, I told you, and my dad was working a lot of hours as a cook at night, so there wasn't a lot of people at home. Um, I got so depressed that after drinking one afternoon, I remember calling my sister and I was crying, and I said, I need help because I can't stop drinking. She wasn't at the house living with me, but she did come over a couple hours later. And she took me to her house and we started talking. And she says, I think I need to take you to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, because that's all we understood. We never were brought up to understand these things of addiction. It's not culturally understood. It's not something that anybody has experienced. And I was 17 years old. I walked into a meeting and I felt really out of place. That's not where my story comes to a happy ending. It I didn't know what to do. People, then they came up to me and they say, "Well, welcome." They were very pleasant, and I knew that they were trying to help me, but I didn't understand. I don't know if I wanted to help. So my sister says the next day, she says, "Well, maybe we should take you to a rehabilitation center," which we went to go visit. And then they said you have to stay in for about 60 days. I didn't want to do that because that made no sense to me. I was too scared to do anything at this point. So she says, "Okay, why don't you at least go get your liver checked out because you've been drinking so much?" I said, "Okay." I went to a doctor about a week later, and the doctor asked me, "Why do you want to get your, you're young and healthy. Why do you want to get your liver checked out?" I said, I've been drinking a lot." And as you know, drinking and depression goes hand in hand because alcohol is a depressant. And he says, "Have you been depressed?" I go, "Well, I don't know. I'm not a very happy person." And he says, "Have you ever tried to harm yourself?" And I didn't really understand the question at the start. He goes, "Do you ever think about suicide?" And I said, "Yeah." And I was honest about it. He goes, "What have you done?" I said, "Last year I bought some drugs on the street and I took a bunch of pills and I had half a bottle of vodka and I put a bag over my head and taped it, hoping I'd never wake up. And 2 hours later, I wake up in my own vomit and I didn't die." He says, "Have you ever acted, have you thought about it since then?" I go, "Yes, I do." So he says, "I'm going to send you in a taxi cab to go to Sunnybrook Hospital, and have you try to check into a psych ward there." So I ended up going up there. They did an evaluation and they didn't have any beds for me. Then they put me on a waiting list. So I went back home and at this point, there's no help around me. At least I didn't think there was any help. I wasn't in school, I wasn't working, and I was completely depressed. 2 weeks later, I had another night where I went and I did a lot of drinking. I ended up on top of the bridge. I think if most of you are in Toronto, there's the bridge, the Prince Viaduct, which they've put a fencing around it because people jump off that bridge. This is back in 1992 before the fencing was up there. And I ended up on top of that bridge. This is 3 o'clock in the morning and nobody was around. And the one person that walks by, I don't know, maybe that's, I don't know, somebody watching over me, was somebody that I used to do drugs with. And he says, "What the hell are you doing up there?" And he pulled me down and he took me to a pool hall, which I used to hang out at, where I used to buy a lot of drugs and used to do my drinking. And he asked the person there to send me to a psychiatric hospital. There's one now, it's called CAMH, but back then it wasn't called CAMH yet. It was the Clark Institute of Psychiatry. And they took me in and it's called a Form 1. They certified me that I'm not allowed to leave because I would do harm to myself. And I was locked away for 6 weeks. They took away my belt. They took away my shoelaces. I wasn't allowed to use a fork. And I was under watch for a week. And I had to detox. I left that place after 6 weeks, and you might think that I would stop drinking, but I didn't because it became scarier for me to leave because now I'm told I shouldn't drink. I had no interest in school. I had no interest in working because I had no, because when in life, if they say there's nothing more dangerous than a person who has no hope, and that's what I had. I had no hope because I had nothing to lose. So at this point, they tell me not to, they tell me not to drink. I don't know what to do. So my sister took me in. She says, "You will come live with me for a while because of the way you feel about mom." Because it was very hard for me to be around my mom at that time because of how much anger I had towards her about the way she was. And you know the story because she was in jail and the way I felt she was not treating us right, how I felt about it. That's a very important word, is how I felt at the time. Um, I ended up spending time with my sister. I eventually they sent me to psychiatrists, and they said that I was had antisocial behavior. I didn't understand what that meant at the time. I had to look it up after, and I being antisocial. Um, they said that it means that you have no understanding of social standards and ethical standards, and it it means that I was homicidal and I was suicidal. The psychiatrist started giving me antidepressants. They started giving me drugs to deal with the effects of alcohol withdrawal. Um, they also sent me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I guess that's where my story is really where I started learning about myself, because this program um, is about believing that there is hope out there. And much of it has to do with spirituality. Again, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it. I'm not as so necessary here to promote Alcoholics Anonymous as a solution. I'm only here to tell my story of how it works. And it works in pretty much 6 parts. The first part is that you have to have an understanding of your thoughts, and you have to be very humble, because as human beings, we're all driven by our ego. And that's why as we go through hurt and pain. The second part is that you have to have some hope that what we believe in, whatever reality is, there's something stronger out there. Whether it's God, whether it's a spirit, whether it's the heavens, whether it's nature, it's up to you to believe that there's hope and some faith and there's trust in your life. You then have to kind of take moral inventory of yourself. Inventory means you have to put down a list of all the things you have ever done, and then you have to have a confession to someone else about it. That's for us to start taking ownership of our life and stop being a victim. You then look at the people that you harm. And when you harm someone, you have to take ownership of that harm, and you go back and you make up for it. You don't just apologize, you make up for it. You say, how do I become a better person because of this? When you've completed that, the idea is for the person to have spirituality in their life and for them to pass on the message to somebody else. That is why I'm doing this. And I do that. I do that today. I volunteer my time to pass on my message to others. How did that program work for me? It was hard. It was hard. You're 18 years old and you have to take ownership of your life, and you're scared in life, and you're trying to blame your parents, your mother, your school, your family. But at the end of the day, it's all on me. It's the choices I make, and it's 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 whatever choices I made in my mind to kind of blame others for that. Um, the reason I speak about my mom, about how difficult it was with her, is I did go through the program and I did make up with her. I didn't even just forgive her, because I came to understand she was the best mother that she could be. I just didn't feel it, and I made a choice to not feel it. I said I'm the youngest of 7, but I said my dad and her raised 6. The reason being, a year before I was born, my mother had a child before me. I had a brother. He was alive for 21 days and he died. I never had an understanding when I was growing up. I never had compassion for that. But when I went through the program, I realized that that was something spiritually I was missing, to understand a parent losing a child. I don't know what that did to my mom. Today that can be addressed. There's there's psychologists, there's psychiatrists, uh, there's diagnosis of that. Back then, there was no help for her. I don't know if that caused her to be depressed. I don't know if that's, maybe she felt she was completely scared and she's overprotective of me, and I can't explain that. All I know is that she loved me the best way that she could. That's something I had learned to realize for myself. And you know, the I got out of my depression with many challenges in life. Life will continue to challenge me. I stopped drinking at 20, just before like I said, just before I turned 21. I got married at 25, and that was unplanned because I was still trying to adjust to life and responsibility and trying to learn about myself. And that was a hard marriage in the early years because I still needed to have a lot of control in my life because I was so scared. I didn't know I was scared of life. I was trying to control people, places, and things, situations all the time. And that became um, hard on the marriage and hard on me. 6 months after I got married, I had a tumor that was growing out of my skin, my right shoulder. It started off as a little, size of a fingernail. It became the size of a golf ball in about 3 months. I had to go in for emergency cancer surgery. I got diagnosed with bone cancer, and it grew. Like I said, they said they'd never seen something grow so fast, and that created a lot of fear in my life. I was trying to, it's funny because 5 years earlier, 6 years earlier, I'm trying to end my life, and now I found that I can stop drinking, and I'm trying to live my life. And now something's going to take away my life, even though I want to live now. And that's why I say challenges come in every day, and it's not the way you expect it. And the doctor said you need to pray for the next 10 years because when we remove this, you're not going to have radiation or you're not going to have chemotherapy, but we will take surgery. And they took out a third of my shoulder blade. So I have no right shoulder blade. And they said, pray for the next 10 years because you'll have to do follow up and checkups all the time by x ray to see if it reaches your lungs. So that was back in 2001. So I'm grateful today that's a challenge that um, I didn't have to drink over. That's how that program works because that could easily drive me back to drinking. My next challenge in life was probably when my mom got diagnosed with cancer herself. And to look back at my life 30 years ago, how much anger I had towards her when she got diagnosed with cancer and she had to go to the hospital and appointments. I was there for her. And in her final year of fighting cancer, I was there by her bedside. I was there when she died. But that's something I can do today, and I'm appreciative of that I can do that. That's what that program has done for me. How the program works is it's very confronting for the person who's drinking to realize that it's the choices that we make. It's really a mind over matter in everyday living. Um, there's 12 steps, but the first steps talks about alcohol. The next 11 steps don't talk about, you hear people say, well, there's 12-step programs out there. Everything else is how you design it for living. Much of it has to do with a very simple understanding that, the mind, body, and spirit is completely aligned. If you don't have the physical, you don't have the mental, you don't have the spirit. And I emphasize a lot of spirituality. When people think of spirituality, they usually think of religion. To me, it's not about religion. Religion is a ritual. Spirituality is how you feel and see, or what your conscious is when you do something. For each one of you to be here tonight, you're here in spirit. It means that you want to do something. You're already here. You have spirituality right here because you're connecting with me and I'm connecting with you. That in itself is spirituality for me. A lot of people think of prayer as and faith has to do with religion. It could be, but for me, it's not. For me to pray is I just pray for peace. It means that it takes me away from what I call resentments. Resentment is when you are angry at life and you're angry at the world, you're angry at someone because you believe you're treated unfairly. And they say when you believe someone treats you unfairly, they teach you to pray for that person, for them to have a good life. That sounded so ridiculous for me when I first started, understanding alcohol. But when you do that, it does take you away from the anger you had. That's why I prayed for my mom after I got better. It takes me away from myself. The most important part about life is you learn to stop thinking about yourself. And that's what happened to me. And today I haven't had a drink, like I said, in 26 years. I don't think about myself the way I used to 30 years ago. I was very selfish. I was irresponsible. I didn't care for anyone else. But today, when Angela says, "Do you want to do something voluntary based?" I don't. For me, it's very easy to say, "Yeah, I'll do it," because for me to do it, it 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 empowers me to not think about the problems I have, and I almost don't have any problems because I keep on doing it every day. It's a constant practice. You know, when I used to, they talk about meditation. Meditation is to understand your thoughts. Meditation is not about, you have to, go to India and become a guru or a swami. Sometimes when I used to think about it, that's what meditation is. It's not. Meditation is to understand what thoughts are we having, and what meaning are we making about a situation. They say it's not the situation that is hard. It's the meaning that we make about the situation makes it hard for us. Just like the way my mother treated me, that's not what made it hard for me. It's the meaning I made about it. That's the choice I made. I said she doesn't love me. And today I know I have choice that it doesn't have to be that way. And that's, to me, is the most powerful lesson when it comes to spirituality, when you change the way you feel and see about life. I know that sounds a bit oversimplified, um, but like I said, I do this on a day-to-day basis with people who struggle. I have about 6, 7 people I wouldn't say they report into me, that I guide every day, who struggle with alcohol and addiction issues and depression issues, that I kind of coach them through, and I do that. It's on a volunteer basis. By me talking to them, it keeps me in a good space, and by me sharing my story with them, it lets them know that they're not alone. And the loneliness is the hardest part, is that sense of not belonging, thinking that there's no help out there, that nobody understands. But when you start opening up and you allow yourself to be vulnerable, which is the most important part, you see that we're all the same as human beings, that we all suffer the same way, thinking we're not good enough, thinking that it'll never get better, thinking that there's no way out, um, thinking that we're just stupid sometimes. I'm not going to say anything because I'm going to sound stupid. And you try to get that person to realize, the more you speak, the more you open up, everybody else says the same thing. It's just as life is just as hard for them as it is for me. So like I said, this is something I can go on forever and forever. I don't want to take up the rest of the time. I thank you all for attending, and happy to answer any questions.
Welcome, everyone. I'm just going to introduce Donald to